freelance in una società di consulenza per le aziende, piccole e medie aziende del nord-est, e poi ho cominciato a collaborare già da un po' col professor... Pronto?
Lorenzo,
sì.
Excuse me. No, we have to switch in English.
English! Even better. Okay, I didn't know. So I start again. Okay, I'm Lorenzo Pomini. I'm working now as a consultant here in the northeast of Italy. Also started a collaboration with Professor Vaia. But my story of 30 years old is with a multinational company, and specifically with the Heineken Group. I've been asked to share my experience in terms of outsourcing. So having worked in all the supply chain pieces, from production to logistic to purchasing, in my experience, and in many different countries around the world, I can now in the next hour I will bring some observations and experience in implementing outsourcing, especially of services, as I was asked to concentrate on outsourcing of services, and also experience when things went well and when didn't go well, because that does happen in the outsourcing activity. You have success, but you have also sometimes issues which comes up. The first thing to do is to decide when you want to outsource an activity. And if you put in a table the strategic activities in the X-axis, and in the Y, if you put the commodity activities, then you most likely you don't want to outsource strategic and specific activity in the company. If you have a strategy, if you want to create a competitive advantage because of that strategy, normally those activities related to that strategy, you like to keep it in-house, because you assume that you will be the best in the world to do that activity, and you consider that a competitive advantage. So this is your core business and core activity you want to keep. Then you have activities which are also very important, very strategic for you, but they are a commodity. Means that you have a lot of suppliers across the globe that are extremely good and extremely performant in that activity. So then you start to outsource, to think to outsource. And then you have activities which are not strategic, but they are very specific. So very difficult to find reliable supplier to outsource. That's also a difficult choice, to keep it in-house or to outsource. At the end, you have activities which are commodity and non-strategic, and then most of the company, they need to outsource, because the company cannot afford to do everything, and they need to focus and to concentrate on the things which can create a competitive advantage. Now, when you outsource service which are a commodity, means that a lot of suppliers are available in the market to do those activities, then the attention points are a bit less. What I mean, for instance, if you want to outsource facility services in a company, or forklift management or maintenance in warehouses, there are many suppliers who are able to do that in a very performant way. So in that case, you have to adapt a bit your needs, understand what the supplier can give. And adapt part of your specification to the experience and to the way of working of your suppliers. And when you select the suppliers, you need to logically understand their experience, understand how they have performed in that specific part. But you can generally trust that they have the competence to do it. And you need to concentrate on defining the service level you want to achieve and the way to measure that service level. So normally they will come to you with this definition of service level. You need to adapt those service level to your needs, but then you need to assure that you are relevant for them as a client, as a customer, and that you have from their side a key account responsible for that, for your company, and that you define well the level of service and the measure of the service level that this company gives to you. So
Lorenzo.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, please, just to give an example, as a former manager into supply chain, so could you just give us some data, numbers of contracts or suppliers or budget that you managed in the last years? Just and type of service or I don't know, goods, for example.
Give one example. If you have in the maintenance service, in many industries have compressors, air compressors in their factories, and you know that there are few global players in maintenance of air compressor. So in that case, you have a supplier who is able to do that very well, have a huge experience on that. So in that case, you need to negotiate the service level and the price, and you don't need to understand how this supplier intends to do the maintenance. The contract we managed, in my experience with Heineken, went from the very small contract of maintenance for a few €100,000 in a factory, in a brewery. Then you go to a global maintenance contract for hundreds of plants, and then it goes to millions of euro of contract for the service. But the other typical example is car rental. In the past, the companies, for their managers, they used to buy cars. Today, most of the company goes to rental companies that give the full service of car rentals, and you don't need to enter into the specification or to understand how these companies are managing the rental, because it's their business. You can trust that they will do that in a good way. You just need to agree on service level and price. The example I gave on facility service.
Sorry, Lorenzo.
Yeah?
How much did you spend, for example, in the last 2 years for maintenance, or anyway for outsourcing services? So, what kind of budget did you manage in terms of outsourcing?
Look, it's huge figures. You talk about, for a big company, hello Giovanni, I think for the big companies, you go easily to for each supplier to tens of millions of euro. So that's the size for maintenance of machine, sometimes maintenance of buildings, or maintenance of, for instance, forklift Yeah. So it's I repeat, it can be huge depending on the size of the company. And when you have a big size of the company, then you go to with the different locations around the world. Then you can play an economy of scale. So then you can go to a global players, but then you need to pay attention that these global players have good organizations in all the countries where you operate. So for this global contract, you need logically to have a sanity check if the execution of the service can be done correctly in all the countries you have operations. But you asked me figures. It's difficult to give figures because it goes from the few €100,000 to the tens of millions per year per suppliers. When you outsource a service which is much more specific, when you don't see suppliers who have enough experience on that, or because your needs are very specific, then if you decide to outsource because you believe this is still not strategic to keep in-house, you decide to outsource, then the effort to outsource is much bigger. It's much bigger because you need to develop your suppliers, or the supplier you will choose, you need to develop him together with you. So it means that you need to select a number of suppliers who are willing, first of all, to understand and learn how to serve you in that activity. So at the end, you need to, at the beginning, you need to understand what are those suppliers about, what are those experience. Then you need to check motivation of the suppliers, why they should invest and spend time to build a contract with you. Then you need to specify the service that you need, define targets, KPIs for the service, and then build a contract with them which is a win-win situation, which they can improve their margin, but also improving the efficiencies of the service they give, or at least keep a minimum of margin for their side, still achieving cost reduction and good service level for your side. So to achieve all this, you need to build quite a partnership or a spirit of collaboration with them to achieve a level of service for specific activities you need. And then you need to take in-house a person who is responsible for the management of the contract with them, because it will be still need some resources internally to manage the contract. So one of the let's say problems I saw during outsourcing in the past is when this common understanding of the service, of the goals of the service, of the roles, when this common understanding was not enough, and when a supplier took a contract, got a contract, and then realized only after start of operation that the real needs and the real difficulties of the contract. And if the switch from one supplier to the other is not easy to do, then that can create problems. The example can be, for instance, transport. transport is an activity which most of the companies outsource. But sometimes service level to the customers and the peak of demands, for instance, specific situation for that market put a lot of pressure in these activities and needs quite some resources to keep the service level at the level that the company needs. And in logistics is one of the area where outsourcing is very common and quite logic to do to transport companies. But when you often have issues in the execution, and because there was not enough understanding from the supplier about the operations and the needs of the operation. Another example can be, again, maintenance, but much more specific. Not maintenance or compressor, which is when you have thousands and thousands of machines which are exactly the same, but maintenance of a specific asset for a company, like for a brewery, for instance, a filler, a bottle filler. So that also the service level, the activities to do for the maintenance, in that case is also extremely important to be defined in advance. So when you outsource a specific activities which is very customized to your need, then the time, the effort to put in the selection of suppliers, in the definition of the service level, and is quite important. And then you really need a person in-house who has the responsibility to manage the contract with these suppliers. If you do these steps in the right way, and then you still measure KPIs regularly of the service, then what you can do is that you help the suppliers to develop, and big companies have a role to develop their suppliers in their specific activities. And then at the end, the suppliers can become extremely performant to do what it needs to do. So the transport is one example where you need all these steps to be successful. Industrial automation, the same, very specific, very customized. Also there, you need to trust the competence you have outside, but you need to really define very well what are your needs and the level of service that you need. So these are the biggest, points which I remember from my experience in outsourcing. Again, some real success, but also sometimes difficulties that in some cases can be also painful to recover and to repair. So I suggest really to put in place the right steps to assure that your outsourcing, your partner is well equipped and understand very well what you need. So, Giovanni, you want more figures?
No, it's okay.
It's okay. I'm always hesitant to give figures because I cannot.
Yeah, no. Okay, no problem. Of course, if you cannot answer, just
yeah. No, the size can be huge. Again, depends on the company, yeah. But it's not only the size, the amount, it's the impact that you can have with this contract in the organization. Because if it goes well, logically it will give value inside. in terms of efficiency, service level, quality. But if it doesn't go well, the damage sometimes can be much more than the saving that you got with outsourcing of activities. So this is important.
Yeah, Lorenzo, I will just to remark the importance of managing suppliers in a multinational company, because into management study, so many times outsourcing and managing suppliers and etc. is a topic not really well addressed. And also some colleagues say that there is a management science of managing outsourcing and suppliers, because as you said, if you are not able or competent to manage contracts, suppliers, you can have a huge negative effect on the operations, on the budget, on the finance, of course on the business.
Yeah.
In the end, so my question was just to remark the importance of this management area within a multinational company, and the real business behind this concept, because the market of outsourcing is really, really huge around the world. Yeah.
Yes, but you are right, Giovanni. If we take out few exception of commodity, when you outsource an activity which is really commodity, so it is like that. You cannot influence so much the way car rental companies service you, for instance, to make a very simple example. But all the rest, the performance of a supplier will depend on the performance of the customer. What I say to with that, if you outsource a service and the company who outsourced the service are not performing well, with low skill, low competence people, not too much attention to the results and to the service level. So if internally the company is not at the level of attention and focus on those activities, having outsourced those activities but keeping still the focus on the results and on the quality of the service, I can tell you the supplier will decrease the resources they put and their performance will go down. On the other side, if the customer, so in this case the company which outsource, is keeping the focus on those activities in terms of contract management, measurement of the KPIs, complaining very quickly when something starts to deviate, and collaborate with the suppliers to look for optimizations in terms of total cost of service. If the company keep the positive pressure in terms of optimization of the service and performance, then the supplier will increase the performance. They will set the level at the level of the customer, because they need also to allocate resources. I remember one example when a company was accepting, in this case, a material. It's not a service, but it's a material, but I think is a good example. In a plant, some materials was accepted at the inbound of the plant. There were some small defects which were normally accepted, and then complaint was sent to the company, to the supplier. So that was an habit to accept defect, complain, and then manage this with credit invoicing, etc., etc. So this, from the supplier, the perception was, okay, it's a defect, it's not good, but at the end, the company is continuing to accept the trucks. Then one day, what the company decided is to send back the truck and not to unload the truck because of this small defect. So that created a burning platform, logically, at the supplier, who said, "Ooh, what happens? They send us a truck back. Why?" So logically, the service level and the quality from that supplier changed dramatically only because of that. There was no other intervention needed. I can tell you this because then the manager of this supplier was hired by me. So after a while, so I had a talk with him about this fact. And yeah, it's again the confirmation. Then you say if a supplier accepts low performance from if a customer accepts low performance from a supplier, the supplier will adapt his performance to that level. That's the most important message for you when you one day you work in a company and you are busy with this activity and you have to decide to outsource and work with a supplier. I really recommend keep internally the level of expectation high. Not only level of expectation high, but stay competent about that service. Be able to discuss and challenge your suppliers on what he does and on the result he gets. If you do that, you will help them to develop and to perform.
Okay, Lorenzo. So you said that you need the strong competencies to manage the suppliers, but if you have not competencies on that service because it's too technical, I don't know. For example, in this course, students have to engage a coder, a software coder, to develop using the crowdsourcing platform an app, mobile app prototype. So they have no competencies on software development and coding and etc. But they need to be effective managing this, let's say, supplier. Also in few weeks, because in 2-3 weeks they need to develop this app prototype. So how we can, let's say, substitute this low competence with the other management tactics or strategies?
So if if it's a product or a service, let's say it's a bit different. But if it's a product, then you don't have the competence to enter into the feature of the product, but then you need to have the competence to describe and specify the functionalities of the product. You at least you need to have the competence to explain the functionalities, to describe the functionalities. Or if you don't have enough competence to mitigate the risk, then you need to evaluate. I would suggest to evaluate the motivation of the supplier to develop such service or material, because if you come across a supplier who has a high motivation to do a certain product or service, then you need to know them very well, and then you can, let's say, put in their hands that service or that development. So if you don't have competence, you need to have the description of functionalities, at least. Or find a partnership with a supplier and assure that the supplier has a high motivation. For instance, on innovation. On innovation, sometimes companies need to go into areas which they really don't know. So they need to put, because it's a new features of a product, a new area which they don't have at all any competence, but they need a supplier which have totally different competence. So in that case, you cannot build the competence inside because you outsource just because you don't have at all that competence. But then you need to build a partnership, and you need to understand how this company can be motivated to achieve the goal that you have. In innovation, that happens quite frequently, that you need to put you need to finally trust, and to get a supplier on board in a project, and being yourself with very low competence on that. But then you need to put in the project a goal for them, which is enough to create the appetite for them to achieve that goal of service and or material. In case of service of IT, if it's a commodity, then yeah, the competence are outside and not anymore inside. But the functionalities and of this service and the reason you ask for these activities or product, and the KPIs of these activities or the features of the product, anyway needs to come from you. Is that an answer, Giovanni?
Yes, absolutely. So I like really much the concept of motivation, then trust, of course.
Yeah.
And this is really true into this small project, because they have a small budget. They have just 50 euros plus other 50 euros, so let's say 100 euros to develop this mobile app. So they need to bring on board an expert, a coder. They need to talk with the coder and negotiate the coder, the timing, because they have just a few days to start with the project and giving these requirements, instructions, and then check the activities, the production, and then check the final product, final outcome.
But so how many suppliers will be involved in this?
Yeah. But usually, when you put a bid into a platform, a crowdsourcing platform, usually you can get hundreds of offers. So they need to select then few suppliers, few coders, and then they need to organize probably a Skype call or Hangout call with the supplier. Try to understand the real expectation of the coder as a supplier, and then also trying to convince the supplier to do the job in a so short time with a so low budget. And so they need to motivate the person. And usually, yes, sharing the idea that this is a very important project for the company, and this is a long term. This is just, you know, a starting of a huge project, and yeah, trying to use, as you said, trying something to motivate.
Yes, to motivate, but also check their motivation, because in this, if you go into a call, a dialogue with these potential suppliers, let them talk, give them space to talk, and you to capture if they understood what you need, and if they are motivated to do it. So the point of the motivation is one of the most important, because when motivation is high, you can have a trusted supplier, but you can, let's say, because you need always to control, but if you have high motivation, you can get more assurance that they will do their best if they have high motivation. And the competence, this I cannot help in this case to judge, to help you to judge the competence of what you have in front. But let them talk more than you, and capture as much as information that you can. So I would suggest to prepare the right question to raise to them in these talks.
Yeah, let me say that the other concept is trust. So building trust is critical for, I agree, for an outsourcing project, but also is difficult. Is challenging. So can you suggest 1-2 practices to build trust between the client and the supplier?
Yeah. For instance, build a win-win situation. Win-win situation means have goals which, if achieved, are bringing, for instance, money into the two pockets, into the pockets of the supplier and the pockets of the customer. So put in terms of, for instance, you have a maintenance contract, which has a bonus or a malus depending on the performance of the assets. So once you have built in the right way this contract, then you achieve not the trust, but you achieve a condition which gives a common goal to the two companies. So if there is a common goal, you can trust, into brackets, trust that the supplier will try to achieve that goal, which is the same for you. Maintenance and performance is one good example. The other example is when you ask a service, facility service, for instance, and when the efficiency of the service can be improved because of the adaptation, the performance of the supplier, but also because of the change of the way of working of the customer. So you agree that when opportunities are detected to decrease the total cost of ownership, not the price, the total cost, when this is found, then you agree from the start that the savings will be shared. between the two companies. That's another way to build a win-win and to have the suppliers that is working with you to improve the service. These are the two examples which comes in my mind.
Thank you. Thank you. So Lorenzo, do you have other suggestions or tactics that you will share how to manage a vendor?
No, I think if I talk again, I will repeat myself most likely. So I think I will wait for questions. Huh?
So guys, do you have questions? So let's interact a little bit more. So, do you have questions? Curiosity?
Yeah, I have a personal question for Mr. Pomini, and it's how did you end up working for Heineken?
Okay, I made a thesis during my university. I was doing food technology in Milano, and I was asked to make a thesis on the energy consumption of a brewery in Italy, and I did this research in the brewery to measure and then to try to decrease the energy consumption there, which we succeeded. And then after some 1.5 years of work during my study of this search, they decided to hire me, and then I went to the Netherlands for a long management training, then back to Italy, and I did all the steps into the supply chain from logistic, production, and technology. And at the end, I was responsible for global production. Was responsible for about 200 breweries, 200 plants across the world. Yeah, so that's the story but it has been always with one company, but with a lot of different culture, a lot of different markets with different level of maturity. So it has been in the procurement, for instance. I've seen many different cases and different level of needs. So, but university, they launched me into the Heineken group. Yeah. Some years ago. Other questions? Not about me anymore, huh?
Maybe I have a question. Going back to the idea of global outsourcing, I would like to know when you outsource to a global company or partner, if there are like challenges from other competitors outsourcing to the same partner. So like you and your competitors use the same approach because you're using the same outsourcing source. So like information management and keep secrets with competitors and all this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. Yeah, you mentioned information. That is the most critical one. Information, because we know that during some project, some of the supplier, they may be extremely aware about a number of data which can be sensitive. For instance, if you have a transport company and you make a contract and you base the contract on the budget, activities. So more or less, this company or materials that you need to buy, or even more sensitive innovation. When you decide to create a new bottle or a new can or a new product, and you need to go to the supplier to develop or start to order new things to them. As you know, there is a non-disclosure agreement, so the supplier is not allowed to use this information for the others. So it's for many suppliers, you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice. You cannot ask a supplier not to work for a competitor. It's very rare for specific project when you have a kind of exclusivity to develop a product with a supplier, then you can create exclusivity for that, and then he cannot do the same with the other ones. But for most of the business in supply chain, it will be difficult to find a supplier that doesn't have a competitor in that. For marketing, for instance, is much more sensitive. For marketing, logically, you don't want to have a supplier which is working for your competitor. For consultant, for instance, our consultant who helped us in, for instance, continuous improvement or in special project like sales operational planning. For those, we ask them what they are doing, and then we tell them, okay, if you work with us in that item, you are not allowed to work with a competitor. But it's sometimes you can let's say limit that. Sometimes it's impossible. So you know that the suppliers have duties of confidentiality, but okay, what happens then? You don't know. You don't know. So you make a good point, and it's sometimes it's on paper is ruled, everything is defined, what is allowed to do or not. But okay, then what really happens? It's another story. Yeah. Other questions?
Questions? Michelangelo, you are ready for a question. I see you.
I'm still wondering. I was wondering about a specific maybe example of a time in which it has found like particular issue trying to find an outsourcing supplier, maybe to give us a particular event or something that was relevant, and maybe something that has helped him, and to maybe some advice or some that he learned from a particular experience, maybe, since he had a lot of years of experience.
Yes. A positive one, you mean?
Yeah. Either a positive or a negative, something by which we can learn something. For example, yeah, something particular, let's say, maybe.
Yes. Facility service, this is a good example. When you have big suppliers who can build, who have experience in managing all what is about facilities in a plant, from the gate to the postal service, to the cleaning, to the all the activities which are for a plant, for a company not core. no, not strategic at all, and that for which there is when I was plant manager, there was quite a lot of focus to manage these activities, because those are impacting a bit the life of everybody in the plant. But the focus and the time to spend on that was not proportionally to the value of those activities. So to go outside and to get a professional service managing those things is maybe not strategic, but it becomes extremely useful because it allows management to focus on the right things, which is the reason why we do outsourcing sometimes in services.
So basically it was to outsourcing non-core activities. So that may still, let's say, steal time to other activities, to other core activities.
Yeah, exactly, that one. Or in terms of performance, it was the one other good example is the maintenance of the forklift truck. Because it became it didn't improve only the maintenance cost, but it improves the attitude of the drivers, because the cost became much more. The cost of breakdown maintenance became much more explicit, because in the contract we need to specify all the way this contract was built in terms of maintenance, of regular maintenance, breakdown, accident, incident. So sometimes the outsourcing put visibility on the real cost of an activity. And you know that visibility is the first element to try then to improve those costs or to reduce those costs. That was another very successful thing. I repeat, one area where success were also coupled with the big issues was transport. Transport is difficult, specifically because margins of the transport company are not so big. So if they find the difficulties in managing the service level you asked, and they realize the difficulties afterwards, it can be tough for them. It can be very tough. And then you don't want to stop them, because every day you need to deliver. So that has been logistic has been always one of the most difficult activity to outsource. Good.
Another question?
Another question. I was interested in like the employee concept, employee parts of Heineken, and I would like to know if you outsource, like use outsourcing companies to engage employees. Like here in Italy, you have Humana. Recruits like for companies and finds employees, and I would like to know if you use this kind of companies to like cover parts of your employee demand or something like that, for especially core competencies.
You know, with so many countries had the local partners, so it was quite a decentralized approach there. And no, in hiring there are global contracts for headhunters. That happens in many companies. But it was very much decentralized to each operating companies. Yeah.
Lorenzo, probably the question is the type of contracting that we have, yes, in Italy, but also in Europe. For example, I think he mentioned Agenzia per il Lavoro Interinale.
Yeah.
And in that case, the contract is a kind of a contratto di somministrazione. And so it's kind of, let's say, outsourcing when you just hire for a short time some key persons and etc. with this kind of contratto di somministrazione.
Yes. I mean, again, I don't want anymore to talk on behalf of Heineken Company. That must be clear in this call because I'm now a consultant. I just share my experience. You have these temporary big suppliers like Adecco, and so they sometimes there are global contract. Most of the time there are local contract with them. Then depends very much on local legislations. So it's quite a decentralized approach for for many companies. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So how much is important the contract in via supplier relationship?
The contract.
Yeah.
I think is once you have a deal, that's good, but the quality of the deal will come on the quality of the contract you do. So the contract is, especially for big companies, must include all the specific features, needs that you can have across your operations. So you need to involve the internal customers in building the contract very well, because suppliers, they can, in a negotiation, they can be put under pressure to decrease the price. The point is that you need to avoid that in the execution of the service, the cost will enter from the window. Huh? So, and to avoid that the final cost of the service will increase versus the deal, you need to have a very solid contract, which include also exceptions or way of working between the two companies. So once the deal is done centrally, for instance, you are far from having the results, because you need to then build a contract which can assure that the execution is according the needs, and you need to put the KPIs in the contract with penalties or bonus. So to be honest, the contract is everything. To have a deal with a price and the description of service, it's not so difficult. Is to have then a contract able to translate this into control of execution, then is crucial. And I recommend to involve the final internal customers of those activities into the construction of the contract. So the people who are using the service at the end, the user, they must participate to the build of the contract. This is one of the most frequent issues coming, because companies tend to centralize purchasing, which makes a lot of sense, because you need to build economy of scale. But then you need to decentralize execution and assure that in the execution, local needs are well taken into account.
Right. Very often you talk about costs, so reducing costs and etc. But how can you motivate the supplier to bring some innovation within the company on the relationship?
Yes, I mean it's my experience that you can motivate them. First of all, you need to have a certain maturity on the other side to understand the opportunities, and then the motivation. You need to bring on the table something to motivate them. One thing, as I said before, to share the savings coming from optimizations is one option. The other option is to increase their quota. So if they do a good work, okay, the gain are for the company, not for the supplier. But okay, the next step is that it gets a bigger business. So it can increase the share of that product or service at the customer side. That's another way to increase the appetite and to motivate them. What else? Then you have sometimes a supplier who, especially with big group, the supplier who want to, especially for installation, new installation, they use a project as a vitrine, as a show off, to show to the world how good they can be. No? That's another way to motivate them. If they found the business with you, a door to open for and to show off to other companies. That's another thing which happened. And again, it's important to understand what can be the motivation for this supplier. This, I suggest, keep this in. If there is something to keep in mind after this call, is this one. Keep attention to what can be the motivation of your suppliers to serve you the best. Keep that in mind. It will help.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, I think that we can close with this.
Okay. Good.
Last, suggest. Tip. Yeah, it will be our motto now.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Welcome, and good luck to everybody with your project.
Yeah.
Huh?
We will need the luck to find the right supplier.
Okay. Okay. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.
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 Bye.